JT Wistrcill of Locked On Utes. We talk a lot about how Utah has won 2 Pac-12 championships in the last 3 years. We also talk a lot about whether or not the Pac-12 was good at football. There are national pundits and Big 12 homers that would say the Pac-12 just wasn't as good as the ACC, the Big 12, the Big 10, the SEC. If the statement is Utah will not win the Big 12 because it's a step up in football, how do Utah fans react?
I think it's a ridiculous statement, frankly, because when you look at what this Utah team has done, they've beaten some of the best teams in the country with Cam Rising at quarterback. Because, look, we can talk about Pac-12, Big 12, whatever it is. All I know is when Utah beat Oregon back in 2021, where was that Ducks team ranked? Inside the top 5. And then when they beat them the first time, they tumbled back to 10 or in the top 10. Utah beat them there. It was the same thing when they played USC back in 2022. Both those times Utah beat the Trojans. They were ranked inside the top 10. If Oregon breaks through that first year and they win the Pac-12, I don't think people are talking about, the Pac-12's down, because who had just won? Oregon, one of the biggest brands. If USC had beaten Utah the second time when they played in 22 and they win the Pac-12, well, then it's like, well, that's Caleb Williams. This is USC football back under Lincoln Riley. He's had a lot of success. Then I don't think we're saying the same thing too. And I'll also add this, because everyone talks about, the Pac-12 soft, all the things of that. Why was Utah able to be successful versus those finesse teams? Not Oregon as much, but more so USC, because they played a physical brand of football. I mean, this is a Utah team where what's the ultimate mark of like physicality too, and like how it's going to translate is how are these guys project to the NFL, right? Like, are you just taking advantage of weaker competition and your guys aren't as good, or do NFL teams see the value in them? Well, just last year, Utah had a defensive end drafted in the 3rd round, and they had an offensive lineman drafted in the 4th round. Year before that, same thing with an offensive lineman too, right? So this is a Utah team, and there's tons of Utah talent in the NFL, like all around on this team too. So this isn't just Utah is just beating up on weak competition, and then their guys don't go on to do anything. Utah has constantly guys that are going on to the NFL, producing at the next level. And also, Utah had a top 5 run defense last year. So they are physical. They've been able to take advantage and do a good job week in and week out because they've just been better than who they've been playing. And yes, the Big 12 might be there. Maybe there's a couple better like rushing offenses. Sure. This Utah defensive line is incredibly deep. These are linebackers who are going to be playing in the NFL. Utah's ready for the challenge, and the Pac-12 was still a physical conference too. If you want to say it was maybe a little less physical because of the quarterback play, sure. But this is a Utah team with their run defense, with the way their offensive line, their identity is established. They are not soft. They are not a finesse team. They're ready for the challenge in this league. And obviously, a lot of people think so too, because pretty much every ranking I see in the preseason thinks this Utah team is going to win the Big 12. So therefore, I'm not the only one who thinks they're more than up to the task physically.
Rocco Beck, Garrett Green, KJ Jefferson are good quarterbacks.
Good. They
are not Shedeur Sanders. They are not in the caliber of a Jalen Daniels. They're not at a Noah Fafita level. And that's the depth of the Big 12, the quarterback position this year. There are 9 guys, like DeQuan Finn, MAC Player of the Year, who plays for Baylor now, could be a game-changing guy that wins them 5-6 games and sneaks up on a couple of teams. Is Utah ready for that level of depth at the quarterback position that the Big 12 is going to offer you? And granted, a couple of those names are guys that are coming over from the Pac-12.
They're definitely ready. I mean, just last year, Utah had to take on Caleb Williams, Shedeur Sanders, who you already mentioned, Bo Nix, and Michael Penix. So, and especially Nix, Penix, like literally all of those guys, like where did Nix go? 12th or whatever, like all top 15 picks, the 3 guys I mentioned, and then Shedeur will be one this year too. I think Shedeur is the best, and Fafita is the other one, right? And yeah, Fafita ended up, and he beat Utah, like credit to him like that too, but Utah's used to facing guys like that, and Utah, they had so many injuries, and they gave me in particular, like they had injuries last year, and then look at the Arizona game, you literally see their 3 best defenders were out. Arizona still probably beats Utah that game if those defenders play, but like to act like Utah can't hang with and they won't be fine. And also like the difference in being home and away. We see it every year in college football where Utah gets that Arizona team at home, and that Arizona team, what are they going to do? Take a step back because they don't have all the talent that they had last year, with a lot of those guys either leaving for the NFL, and then the rest of them ended up transferring out too. So this is a Utah team that's used to facing off against some of the best quarterbacks in college football. They are ready for the challenge that comes in the Big 12. And as I mentioned too, the only game I look at where I'm like, ooh, this is going to be tough for Utah in terms of that quarterback matchup to me is the Shedeur Sanders one, because I think he's the best quarterback they're going to play on their schedule. That's a road game too. Obviously, Oklahoma State is good. Alan Bowman isn't anywhere near the caliber of the quarterbacks that we've discussed so far, in my opinion. So yes, Rocco Beck, solid. KJ Jefferson too. But in Beck's case, Utah gets him at home. And in Jefferson's case, I think this Utah team is ready to take on a quarterback of his talents because, simply put, they've just played better quarterbacks several times. These guys, and I didn't mention Anthony Richardson. This defense took on Anthony Richardson a few years ago too. Now, he beat up on him, but also that was, I think, a lot had to do with the Florida climate and Utah not being ready for that, because that was Utah's worst tackling performance I've ever seen. So worst tackling performance I've ever seen. That makes it an outlier. What's the common trait in that? Well, it was in Florida, and those guys are not used to playing in Florida. Just like last year's Florida team comes out to Salt Lake City, and they look abysmal. When Utah travels out to Florida this year, that will be all the way in late November, where the humidity like that will not be as much of a factor. And no offense, KJ Jefferson, he's not Anthony Richardson. So I think Utah is more than ready for the quarterbacks they're going to be facing off against this fall.
If someone points last year at the Northwestern game and says, we're all picking Utah number one in the conference. They lost to Northwestern in a bowl game, who went through just a wild college football season themselves, and Utah put up 7 points. What's the rebuttal to that?
I just don't care about bowl games. That's the thing. And I'm not talking about like my perspective. I'm talking about when we are talking about a successful brand in the sport right now, I think bowl success does not matter at all because of who opts out, because of who leaves, because of everything that happened. Utah's top wide receiver didn't play in that game. Utah had 2 offensive linemen, if I'm correct, not playing that game too. They had both of their NFL safeties who were drafted inside the top 5 rounds depart for the draft. So literally Utah, for having good players, being good defensively, finishing the regular season 8-4 despite all those injuries, had several guys miss the bowl game too, even in an already injury-riddled season. I just don't think you can look at a bowl game as an indicator for success, because also if we look at that bowl game, like we're doing right now, Utah's going to have a new quarterback in. Utah will have, their top 3 pass catchers will probably be entirely different, and they're also proven commodities, right? Damian Alford averaged 19 yards a catch last year, over 600 yards at Syracuse. Dorian Singer, over 1,000-yard receiver. Brant Kuithe has had 2 separate seasons over 600 yards receiving as well. So all those guys completely different. Mekhi Bernard came back in the bowl game. That was his first game back coming off an injury that he'd missed pretty much the entire season. So now he's going to be back and fresh for this year. You also look at that offensive line that will be revamped instead of having makeshift guys who haven't started all season then getting thrown out there because you have a couple other dudes who opted out and you're trying to patch it together too. And the Utah defense, same thing, where you had a lot of those guys getting their first opportunity and start. We're not talking about, is this Utah defense the very first game going to look better than Northwestern? I think they'll look pretty good because they're going against Southern Utah, but this is a group that is settled in. Utah has 2 Pac-12 championships in the last few seasons. Utah, even last year, an injury-riddled season, went 8-4. Because that is the version of Utah that we've seen when their guys are playing in the regular season. I just don't think we can take bowl game success into consideration too much, especially for a team like Utah, because it's not the same team that was there in the regular season when you look at the losses that are there. I'm not saying that bowl games don't completely matter, but I think when you're projecting Utah's success, and being like, well, they lost in the bowl game. Well, if you look at how different the roster is going to be, that to me is just not a good indicator. And once again, Utah's picked to win the Big 12. So that bowl loss to Northwestern and Las Vegas obviously doesn't haunt them too much.
JT Wister, so Locked On Utes. Well done.
Always fun, Drake. Appreciate you.
Anybody who's wondering that out there about the bowl game, they're not wondering anymore. You told you ate no crumbs, as the kids say.
I had some demons to exercise, so I appreciate you letting me get those out late tonight.
If you are a Locked On Big 12 listener, follow JT Wistersill on social media and follow and subscribe to Locked On Utes. And thank you for making these 2 shows your first listen every single day. Come back tomorrow, even more football. And the Big 12 preview is out as well as we bring you the around the conference, around the horn. JT, you weren't there, but I represented Utah, and I represented them well around the horn across the Big 12 preview for 2024. This has been and always will be Locked On. Thanks for making it your first listen every single day. Utes, and Dose Grande.